place. So that's one important point, number one. Number two, down at the bottom, elements of the apprentice license, the far left, may parallel the first half of an educator preparation program in license 3. So we're seeing those as parallel experiences that while there would be different institutional differences and those kinds of things, we would think people who are at roughly the parallel stages in the process of becoming a teacher. Keep in mind, apprentice cannot be the teacher of record. They're not included in that status. And the early EPP phase, which was just a general way of capturing that part of EPP programs, they cannot be the teacher of record. Then the second note at the bottom, license 3 interns may meet conditions to serve as the teacher of record, given that their level of preparation is equivalent to or exceeds, in some cases, what we may see in license 1 and license 2. So what would we expect an intern to have exhibited to be able to go into a classroom as the teacher of record, and what conditions would we recommend if that were the case? And then, as we had captured in previous conversations, and it's noted in the fourth, the bottom of the left-hand column, there are assumptions about compensation that are tied to all of these now. So, Kim, if you could go to the next slide. Well, let me go ahead and explain what we'll do, and then we'll see if we have questions. There you go. So what we're going to do is 2 sessions of breakout groups. We're going to have people go into breakout groups, use this tool to begin documenting the declarative language that we are made, the recommendation language. Think of it that way, that we would refine and move forward. So in the first session, which is going to be about 45 minutes, we're going to work on the chart based on people's prior conversations, notes, and what work we've done so far. Literally putting text in that chart. We're going to cut after 45 minutes and spend about 15 minutes discussing, are we hitting any barriers? Are there things that are popping up that are getting in the way of being able to do this? And we want to try to resolve those, and then go back into, after we've talked across the groups, go back into the small groups to have a second session where we're continuing to write, but also doing some refining based on what we hear from the other groups. When you get into the breakout sessions, you'll have the documents. If someone could facilitate the discussion, and there's a note taker, that we really want to capture the text on the document, because that will become the writing, the basis of the writing tool. And then we'll come back out in the end and synthesize where we are and get ready for the next steps. Hank and Kim, did I capture it all?
Got it.
Okay. So does anyone have questions about what we're getting ready to do? And just a working hint, if you find yourself asking a question, what would your answer be? Well, so we as the professionals and the experts and the people who are framing this, if we have a question about what should be, what should our answer to that be? What's the answer to the question? That's what we're trying to start to frame out now. Kim, I think we're ready.
Dan, may I ask a quick question?
Sure.
It's Diana Leese here. Good morning, everybody. In capturing these ideas, I'm just thinking sometimes we can, as educators, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So my assumption is if there is a half-formed idea that might need some wordsmithing, we want to capture that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
One of my favorite phrases that I learned in grad school, we are spew drafting right now, but we're trying to capture what we think are the important elements of what these recommendations ultimately will become.
Okay, we're ready to go.
I think so.
Morning, Jeff. Did you want to be in a group?
Kimberly, are we all back?
We are all back.
So we have 15 minutes to basically, this is like halftime. So what worked in the first half and where do we run into some problems? And, we have 30 minutes coming next to continue to work on this. Kim, how many breakout groups did we have?
There were 4.
Okay. So I guess because we are limited on time for this part, key highlights of your discussion so far and any sort of hang-ups or you got stuck on a point kinds of comments. Kimberly, if you could call out a person in each group.
There was Heather Bauer in group 1. Also Tom, Ray, and Christina.
Okay.
I think Christina's going to speak for us.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Had to get to unmute. We spent a lot of time just trying to kind of clarify where we wanted to start. And we spent a lot of time kind of deciding that the first row was a little bit dangerous, that focusing on the credentials, we felt like really would maybe lead us down the wrong path in terms of leading us back into the same kind of paradigm that we're already in, that kind of we're supposed to be breaking out of, which is, to be based on outcomes, right? So we kind of started there and a lot of discussion around that idea and ended up moving to the second row and thinking about evidence or proxies for effective practice and really trying to zero in on the competencies that we would want to see at each license. So at the apprentice level, we're really looking for some baseline competency in terms of basic academic skills, core knowledge, which might be represented by an associate's degree or lower division. Like 60 credit hours in a 4-year institution, but really, not so much focusing on that as focusing on like what does that represent? That represents core knowledge, right? General knowledge and basic academic skill. And then moving into license 1, we talked about content knowledge, classroom management, building relationships with students. In license 2, we talked about pedagogy, innovative classroom strategies. And then we started talking about license 3, and there's a little bit of confusion around like where this idea of interns or EPP interns falls. But I'm imagining that license 3 is like, at that point, you're sort of a fully formed beginning teacher, right? You kind of have all of those pieces at level of proficiency, and then you're moving into trying to work towards that level 4 license, right, and demonstrating impact and those kinds of things. So what we talked about is when we come back into our group the next time is maybe starting with all the things that a license 3 teacher would have, and then maybe kind of mapping backwards from that into license 1 and 2. But we really feel like what we need to start with is like, what is it we expect folks to know and be able to do at each of these license levels, instead of focusing on like they need this GPA or they need this course or they need this test score. Group, fill in if I missed anything. Did I miss anything important?
I think you got it. Thank you.
Christina, did you start to answer those questions, what people know and what people need to be able to do?
We did. We have bullet points. I think I listed them. So in the apprentice level, we talked about basic academic skills, core knowledge. At license 1, so far we talked about baseline competency in content knowledge, classroom management, and building relationships with students. In license 2, we talked about pedagogy and innovative classroom strategies. So we're getting there. We started that.
Yeah, thanks. Kim, who's next?
Group 2 is Jennifer, Cheryl, Andrew, Tanya, and Jeff.
Yeah, and Cheryl just told me that she would be thrilled to share what we talked about. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Sure. So we did not have the same wisdom of Group 1 to avoid row 1. And that was an easy place to get bogged down. And we did start with license 3 to try to work our way backwards. But even within that, we, similar question, does license 3 mean the person has already completed the EPP program and can enter, or is this exiting? And we understood it to be they completed the EPP program. So we listed that as one of the minimum credentials, one option for that, of course, bachelor's degree. And then when we moved to minimum evidences, it was here that we got stuck on the testing question again. And as has happened in most of the breakout groups I've been in for all of this process, it is hard for us to get away from that issue. So that, of course, took up a considerable amount of time. We did finally discuss the supports necessary, and if, without reaching full consensus about whether the candidate should have passed all licensure tests for level 3. When we went to the EPP LEA supports, then we became focused on, well, if the EPP is out of it, then all of those supports are with the LEA, and we built a strong discussion around the importance of the mentor within the school. But then we returned to the question, if they haven't passed their test, should the EPP still be involved in that support? Which again points to needing to be able to answer the questions about where tests live and where they need to be passed, or if they have to be passed. We did also begin tackling minimum credentials for the other license areas for apprentice, associate, or equivalent. We were saying bachelor's for license 2 and license 1. And then we also moved into the debate about equity and whose child is in the class with a person who might have only a bachelor's with no other minimum credentials. So we might have spent much of our time on philosophical questions. Colleagues, if I left anything out, please add to. Thank you.
Cheryl, what did you mean by the phrase the EPP is out of it? I sort of caught part of it.
So if we're designing a system where license 3 means they completed the EPP program, we've signed off on that, then we're no longer providing the instruction or the supports. They've now been handed over to the employer, the LEA system.
Thanks.
If I can just add one thing, I'm sorry, Cheryl, and this is just kind of a summary of what we were talking about. I think one thing that we need to, Cheryl brought up a great point about a student whose residency who couldn't handle it and didn't understand being in a school. And I think as educators, we need to think about, would we rather have our kid taught by somebody who finished a program and was trained properly by an EPP or passed all the tests? And I think my answer would be someone who's been trained properly, because to me the testing doesn't matter and if they've been trained properly. And I think that's kind of the philosophical question where we were getting stuck. So.
Kimberly?
Group 3 is Hank, Laura, Aaron, Lydia, and Dason.
Yes, and I get to speak for our group. Can you hear me? So we kind of went, and instead of doing rows, we did columns. And so we actually started with the apprenticeship or the apprentice level license, and we said, holding an AATP or ASTP or an AAAS with some type of clinical experience, and if in a CTE area, working towards the appropriate credential for certification, or 60 credit hours towards a bachelor's degree, if not in a teacher education bachelor's degree. They, again, must have some type of clinical experience in K-12 schools. We then defined what that experience would be, what that minimum experience. So either completion of an introduction to teaching course at the associate's or bachelor's level that includes a field experience in a K-12 classroom with a minimum of 20 hours, or serving as a substitute for at least 10 days, or being employed as a teacher assistant. And we said that the substitute being 10 days being more than the other two was because they don't really, when you're serving as a substitute, you don't really have a model in the classroom. You're kind of out there. And while, again, it is a pretty intensive experience of essentially trial by fire, we felt like the value of the field experience when they're working with a cooperating teacher or serving as a teacher assistant with another model teacher in there was a stronger experience. We said some other requirements was looking at academic achievement, so that minimum GPA of 2.7, or making satisfactory academic progress. And so because we do know that we have lots of folks that come back and think, so many students that don't realize how much their GPA or what they did before they finish their degree matters. And so allowing an avenue into that if they don't have the 2.70 GPA, making satisfactory academic progress, which all of our four-year or SACS accredited institutions have some metric for that in our institutions. As far as supports, we did say they must affiliate with a state-approved EPP at a bachelor's degree granting institution. And then the EPP support would be providing access to coursework and appropriate clinical experiences and providing university-based clinical support, while the LEA would create and hold an apprentice-level orientation program. So we talked a lot within ours about how this isn't necessarily the beginning teacher support program. It's a little bit different because it'd be really important to have both the apprentice and the master teacher that they're working with engaging in that orientation together to be able to define the roles and responsibilities within that classroom. Excuse me. And we, for compensation, we really didn't come up with a number. We just said that, excuse me, teachers can only live here as long as they're making satisfactory academic progress towards their bachelor's degree, with the possibility of waiving that for their first semester on the license, so that they have a chance to get oriented and settled kind of in their teaching role as an apprentice. And then we said the pay would be somewhere, we didn't put a number on it, but a step up from teacher assistant, but less than a license one. And then we had moved on to license one and kind of looking at that and how it shifts. And we found that we kept having to go back to apprentice and revise because we would have questions that came up. I think one of our biggest kind of questions and challenges that we struggled with, and we kind of have it as a side caveat notes on our notes, is, we run into this also with residency, where we have these teachers who are employed by a district, but also part of the EPP, and thinking about, so the EPP makes the licensure recommendation. And because we do have these other license levels now, if a teacher is at an apprentice and they've met the criteria to move to a license one, but if the district, and so the EPP is ready to move them, but the LEA may say they need to still be at the apprentice level, like, where's that responsibility and kind of onus fall? And then so that's where we were. So we were about halfway through license one as we were going down our columns in our group.
Thank you, Aaron.
My group, anybody else have anything to add?
You captured it.
Thanks.
And number 4.
I think that's me. Hi, everybody. I was in the group with Megan, Maya, and Van, and for our conversation. I think we hit on a lot of things that have already been mentioned. So I like the strategy approaches, some in the rows and some in the columns. I think we were probably more of a matrix group. We went a little bit all over the place as we were filling in.
We, for minimum qualifications, looked at apprentice about being successfully admitted to the community college and moved that up from license 1 to 2 about affiliating with an approved EPP. In the second row about minimum evidences, we talked a bit about testing and also performance assessment. What we added to our license 3 was to have those license 3 candidates pass a minimum performance assessment. We talked a little bit around the idea of testing and where that would fit in here and whether or not this was our opportunity to move testing as we know it, traditional testing, out of this conversation. So we did not add anything to our boxes yet. So it's interesting to hear how others explored that. In looking at the next row of EPA and LEA supports, there was a strong voice for having the apprentice teachers affiliate with a mentor teacher that is a level 4 plus. And that having the license 1, 2, and 3 teachers affiliate with an advanced teacher with a preference for a level 6 mentor teacher, and allowing some flexibility for districts to engage in in-house or contracted coaching support, such as the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program. In compensation, we have across our row about the compensation level for the apprentice teachers would be at the similar level to the current compensation for teaching assistants, possibly. We still had a question mark on that. And that the current compensation for our first year beginning teachers would be associated at a level 1 and 2, such that the compensation for a level 3 teacher would be increased over what it is currently and be commensurate with the qualifications that would go along with that. I think our point there also is that our EPP prepared teachers, we know based on the research, are the have the best outcomes based on the data that we have in our state, and that the feeling in our group was that they should be compensated for that and that track record that goes along with it. So that is the quick summary from our group. I welcome anybody to add at this time. If I missed anything. While I'm also the hot mic, I'll say I have to leave at 9:30. It's good to see you all this morning.
Thank you, Diane. So we've got about 40 minutes left, and I'm trying to follow the chat. Before we go back into breakout groups, does anyone have any procedure questions? We're going to go back in for an amount of time, and I have a couple of suggestions, but I want to see if there are any overarching questions or comments before we break out again.
And I just wanted to, if it's okay, I just wanted to make one comment.
Sure.
You hear me okay? And I shared this in our small group because, and I know, you know, these are like tough conversations. I think every group got sort of bogged down in some of the philosophical and sort of the tough questions. But I think one thing to keep in mind with this framework model is that the license 1, 2, and 3 are not permanent licenses. So there are steps along the way to that eventual license 4. And so I think as we're thinking about these, the requirements for these licenses along the way, I think they're really indicators of what we think eventually would be a sign that a teacher is going to be effective, and that it's really license 4 that's the goal, and which is based solely on effectiveness. And so while, you know, there's tough questions to be tackled at license 4 about how we measure that effectiveness, I think maybe that helps us not to get bogged down in how we're going to measure 1, 2, and 3, is that those are not it's not the end goal. The end goal is license 4. And so how do we really think about what we know as, or what our EPPs, but also the rest of us know as professionals, are indicators of a teacher's eventual effectiveness along the way that helps us to sort of get to where we may need to be on these licenses, on license 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments, questions? So go ahead. Hank, you ready to roll into the breakouts again?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to roll.
Okay, so Kim, I think we're probably going to have about 20 minutes in this one, and then have time to come out and wrap up. I would recommend, because we are going to have a shorter amount of time this time, even if you don't have fully fleshed out ideas or recommendations, get a bullet down so we'll have it on the document so we can come back to it. But make sure you capture, even if it's not fully developed, make sure you capture it in your group on the template so we have that moving forward, because we're going to come back and revisit it again. Keep in mind, we're going to now merge 4 manifestations of this into a document that our eyes will be on again. So make sure you get bullets down even if they're not fully formed. Kim, I think we're ready to go. So we'll take about 20 minutes and then we'll come back out.